If you heard soft cries coming from behind your shed on a rainy October morning, would you go see what it was, or just shut the door and pretend you didn't? Henry Miller, 68, had no plans to face the outside world that day. Still in his pajamas, he sat in the kitchen of his cabin in rural Vermont, staring into a cold cup of coffee that had been reheated 3 times. Since his wife passed away last winter, the silence in the house had grown so loud, it made his bones ache. His only companion was Jasper, a gentle golden retriever with cloudy eyes and a heart still full of loyalty. The days had blended together lately, broken only by the sound of wind in the trees or Jasper's slow footsteps pacing the hall. But this morning, it was something else entirely. You're not going to believe how this story ends. It'll move even the most hardened hearts. When Henry followed the sound that morning, he uncovered a moment so raw, so unlikely, it left even the veterinarian in tears. What Jasper did next was instinctive, impossible to explain, and it would change all their lives in ways no one could have expected. Henry stepped outside with his coat barely on, muttering to himself about raccoons or broken branches. Jasper was already ahead, sniffing the damp ground with purpose. The crying was faint but constant, coming from the tangled brush near the edge of the woods. As they got closer, Henry's steps slowed. In the mud, under a collapsed log, was a small red bundle, soaked, trembling, eyes shut tight against the world. It was a fox cub, no more than a few weeks old, whimpering like a lost child. The cub didn't move when Henry knelt beside it. Its fur was matted with rain and dirt, and one tiny paw was twisted at an unnatural angle. Jasper sat down beside the creature, nose inches away, and did something that made Henry's throat tighten. He leaned in and gently wrapped his body around the shivering cub, not out of curiosity, not to play. It looked like a hug. Henry didn't know what to do. Every instinct told him to leave it be. Foxes were wild animals, dangerous, diseased. They didn't belong in houses or laps or hearts. But Jasper wouldn't move. He stayed curled around the cub like a living blanket, his eyes never leaving its face. The sky darkened with more rain as Henry wrestled with something heavier than the storm, a memory he didn't want, rising like a tide. 3 winters ago, his wife had curled up on that same porch, holding their dying cat in her lap through the night. He'd tried to stop her, said it was nature's way. She didn't listen. "Warmth is the last gift we can give," she whispered. That moment came roaring back now, as Jasper cradled the fox. Henry stood there, stunned, soaked to the bone, but it wasn't the rain that made his eyes blur. He went back inside and grabbed an old wool blanket, wrapping the cub carefully, Jasper trailing behind him. Inside, he cleared a spot by the fireplace and laid the bundle down. The fox didn't cry anymore, just twitched now and then in its sleep. Jasper curled beside it again. Henry sat across the room, unsure of what he'd just agreed to. He hadn't spoken to another person in days, but now there was this creature, and Jasper's quiet insistence. The night dragged on in fits and starts. Henry watched the cub breathe, shallow and slow, afraid to sleep in case it stopped. Jasper stayed by its side the entire time, occasionally licking its ear or adjusting the blanket with his nose. Around midnight, Henry finally whispered aloud, "You're not going to let it go, are you?" Jasper didn't move. By morning, the fox still hadn't opened its eyes, but it was alive. That alone felt like a miracle. Henry made a call he hadn't thought he'd ever make again, to the local vet clinic. "I think I've got a fox here, hurt bad, my dog found it." The receptionist hesitated, but transferred him. The vet, Dr. Emery, agreed to take a look. Henry loaded the fox into an old laundry basket, Jasper sitting beside it in the back seat. He didn't realize until halfway to town that he was holding his breath. Something about this tiny animal, the way Jasper had responded, it stirred a part of him that had gone quiet long ago. What he didn't know was that the cub's condition would reveal something far more devastating, and it would break open everything Henry thought he'd buried for good. The clinic was quiet when Henry arrived, but Dr. Emery was already waiting by the door. He was in his 40s, usually calm and methodical, with the kind of composure that only years of rural emergencies could teach. But as soon as he saw the fox cub in the basket and Jasper, refusing to leave its side, his expression changed. "You found it like this," he asked, already reaching gently to examine the animal's fragile limbs. Henry nodded, not trusting his voice. Jasper stood frozen, alert but calm, as if he were personally delivering something sacred. Inside the exam room, Dr. Emery laid the fox on a warmed pad, checking vitals, paws, ribs, and eyes. The cub had multiple abrasions, a fractured leg, and a mild case of hypothermia. "It's lucky he found her when he did," he said. "A few more hours and she'd be gone." He paused and looked at Jasper, who was now sitting by the table, watching everything with unblinking attention. "Dogs don't usually do this," Emery added softly. "It's like he knows her." Henry let out a short, nervous laugh. Knows her? It sounded absurd. But part of him had felt the same thing. There was something in Jasper's stillness, in the way he'd wrapped himself around the cub without hesitation, that felt too intentional to dismiss. "Can animals recognize trauma in others?" he asked. Dr. Emery didn't answer at first. He just kept working, gently wrapping the fox's leg, placing a light fore in her paw. Then, very quietly, he said, "Sometimes, they see what we don't." The fox, despite her injuries, had made it through the night, but her recovery would take weeks. She was too young to be returned to the wild. Wildlife rehab was an option, but it meant separation. Jasper, however, had made his opinion clear. Every time the vet tried to move the fox without him present, the dog whined softly and grew restless. When allowed near, he'd rest his chin gently on the edge of the blanket, as if guarding her sleep. "Legally, you can't just keep a wild animal, Doctor," Emery warned, "but I've never seen this kind of bond before." He hesitated. "You'd need a temporary permit and training and, it's a lot, Henry." That word, a lot, didn't sit right. Henry had lived through a lot, and in his chest, beneath the grief and the weight of months spent alone, something flickered like a match catching. He looked down at Jasper, then at the cub. "We've already started," he said. The vet ran some additional scans, just in case. What he found made his face go pale. There was a faint line on the fox's ribs, a small indentation near the sternum. "She's been hit," he whispered. "Not by a car. This is blunt force trauma. Intentional." Henry didn't move. The thought that someone had done this to something so small, so helpless, sent a flush of heat to his face. "Kids?" he asked. "Traps?" Dr. Emery didn't answer. He just shook his head slowly. Back at home, the fireplace glowed with new warmth. Henry cleared out the guest room and lined a corner with towels, heating pads, and Jasper's favorite blanket. He fashioned a small enclosure from an old baby gate. The fox was weak but stable, and Jasper, true to form, refused to sleep anywhere else. He nestled next to the gate, one paw stretched inside, resting near the cub's nose. Over the next few days, Henry watched their interactions with quiet wonder. Jasper would lick the cub's ear gently before meals. When she cried, he'd nuzzle her until she stopped. And when she began to move slowly, trembling, Jasper never left her side. Henry started documenting everything, partly for the vet, partly because it felt important, like proof of something pure that still existed in the world. But the questions wouldn't leave him. Who would hurt a fox cub like that? And why had Jasper, an old dog with fading eyesight and aching hips, responded so fiercely, so immediately, as if protecting something personal? Dr. Emery had asked the same. Sometimes, he'd said, the past finds a way to surface through the ones we least expect. Henry didn't have answers, but he had a feeling, a gut-deep knowing that this wasn't just a rescue, it was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. By the end of the week, the fox had opened her eyes, bright, wide, still cautious. She didn't flee when Jasper approached. She didn't cry when Henry changed her wraps, and when she fell asleep, it was always curled against the old dog's chest. That night, as wind howled outside the windows and memories knocked once more on Henry's mind, he made the choice that would shift everything. He couldn't walk away anymore. The decision set something in motion that Henry hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Each morning now had a rhythm. Wake early, check the fox's vitals, let Jasper outside, boil water for compresses. He moved slower than he used to, but with a steadiness that surprised even him. The cub, whom he started calling Fern, was eating soft food now, mostly by hand. Her broken leg was healing, but she still limped with a tenderness that made Henry's chest tighten. Jasper watched her like a guardian, moving only when she moved. On the 10th day, Fern took her first few steps across the living room rug. Jasper stayed beside her, matching her speed, every movement careful and deliberate. Henry sat frozen in his recliner, coffee in hand, afraid to even breathe. When Fern stumbled slightly and Jasper nudged her gently with his nose to steady her, Henry felt a sudden warmth run down his cheek. It wasn't just about them, it was about everything he thought he'd lost: connection, gentleness, and the strange sacred courage of showing up. News of the fox cub and her dog companion spread quickly. Dr. Emery had quietly shared a photo with a wildlife specialist who shared it. Again, until a local paper asked if they could visit, Henry hesitated but agreed. When the journalist arrived, Fern was curled in a ball near the hearth, Jasper's head resting lightly over her body. The woman snapped a photo, then sat back, quietly stunned. "I've never seen anything like this," she said softly. ... He's protecting her from something he remembers? The article ran with the headline, "Old Dog, Broken Fox, Shared Heart." It was meant to be a human interest piece, but something in it resonated deeper. Strangers began sending letters, stories of their own grief, of animals who healed them, of love that didn't look the way they expected. Henry read each one slowly, sometimes twice. A widow from Maine? A Vietnam vet from Tennessee? A teenager from Oregon who'd lost her cat in a wildfire? "They all feel it," Henry told Jasper one night. "Whatever it is we've got here, they feel it." But not everyone approved. A local wildlife official showed up unannounced 2 days later, clipboard in hand, tone cold. "You can't keep a wild fox in your home," he said. "Even with a rehab permit, this is unorthodox." Henry listened, jaw tight. He wasn't a man who argued often, but something about Fern and Jasper, the bond they'd built, was worth fighting for. He explained everything, from the injuries to the dog's strange protective behavior. The officer remained skeptical. "You're not trained for this," he said. Dr. Emery stepped in. He offered to vouch for Henry's care and monitor the cub's progress weekly. "What's happening here is rare," he told the official, "but it's real. And if you take her now, I don't think she'll survive the stress, especially not away from that dog." There was a long pause before the official agreed temporary custody under strict supervision. Fern could stay for now. That night, as rain tapped gently on the windows and Jasper let out a long, contented sigh, Fern did something new. She stood on 3 legs, limped across the room, and climbed awkwardly, carefully, into Henry's lap. She nestled there, her head beneath his chin, eyes half closed. Henry didn't speak. He didn't need to. Jasper moved beside them, curling at Henry's feet, his breathing calm, and even the silence was no longer heavy. It was full. Days turned into weeks. Fern grew stronger, her limp faded to a mere hesitation. She began exploring more of the house, but never too far from Jasper. The dog, in turn, seemed younger. His tail wagged more. His eyes, though cloudy, tracked Fern with a kind of light Henry hadn't seen in years. They were healing each other. One step, one gesture, one quiet moment at a time. Then came the call that broke everything open. Dr. Emery had gotten results back from a deeper scan done on Fern's ribs, something that hadn't made sense. "Old scar tissue, a healed puncture mark? Henry," he said quietly, "I think this fox has been hurt before. Maybe months ago. It's not just one trauma, it's many." He paused. "And Jasper, he had those same marks. Years back, remember?" Henry remembered the hunting trap. The night Jasper came home nearly torn apart, and suddenly, everything made sense. They weren't just bonded, they were survivors of the same pain. It wasn't a coincidence, it was recognition. Jasper hadn't just found Fern, he'd known her. Not literally, perhaps, but to soul, to wound. And somehow, Henry had found both of them just in time. Spring arrived quietly that year, without announcement. One morning, Henry opened the front door and noticed the trees had bloomed overnight. Soft petals hanging like promises. Inside the house, the rhythm had changed. Fern no longer slept by the fireplace. She had claimed a spot by the window where she watched birds and the occasional squirrel with calm interest. Jasper remained her shadow, though slower now, his body stiff in the mornings. But every time Fern nudged his shoulder or curled beside him, something in him relaxed, as if he remembered what it meant to feel safe. Henry's days were no longer silent. The house buzzed with soft movements, small rituals. He'd prepare Fern's food, a mix of eggs, chicken, and supplements, while Jasper waited patiently for his portion. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch together, one man, one aging dog, and a fox with fire in her fur and quiet in her eyes. They didn't need words. Fern would lean her head into Henry's hand. Jasper would sigh and press against Henry's knee. And in those still moments, Henry felt whole again. Neighbors started dropping by, first just to ask about the fox, but then to stay. A young couple from down the road brought fresh vegetables. A retired teacher left a handmade collar for Jasper. Children whispered as they passed the fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous fox who lived with a dog and a man who used to be a ghost. Henry welcomed them all, not with fanfare, but with coffee, stories, and the quiet strength of someone who had been broken and found beauty in the fracture. Eventually, a local wildlife sanctuary reached out. They had read Fern's story and asked if Henry would speak at a fundraiser. "Just tell them the truth," the woman said. Henry stood in front of a modest crowd, nervous, unsure, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. He didn't talk about biology or rules. He talked about pain, about connection, about how a dog who nearly died once had found a fox who almost didn't make it, and how both had saved a man who thought his life was over. The sanctuary offered something else, a special waiver. Fern could remain with Henry and Jasper permanently, as long as her health remained stable and her behavior safe. The approval came with a certificate and a quiet visit from the State Wildlife Board. But to Henry, the real confirmation was something smaller. One afternoon, as he sat by the garden pulling weeds, Fern trotted up and dropped a pine cone in his lap. Jasper barked once, tail wagging. It was their version of a handshake or just maybe a thank you. Months passed, and the seasons changed again. Jasper began to slow noticeably. His hips gave out on cold mornings, and Henry had to lift him gently into bed. Fern, once the weak and voiceless cub, now stood taller. She brought Jasper his toys. She nudged his food bowl closer when he was too tired to reach, and, on the night Jasper finally didn't get up, Fern curled tightly against him, as she had that first rainy morning. Henry stayed beside them both until the sky turned pink. Jasper's passing was quiet, and yet it echoed through the home like thunder. Henry buried him under the old oak tree, with Fern sitting silently beside him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Fern climbed into Henry's lap, just like she did the night she'd first walked on 3 trembling legs. She looked up at him, not like a pet, not even like an animal, but like a soul that understood. Henry kept writing letters to strangers, journal entries. A children's book based on Fern and Jasper's story was picked up by a small press. The royalties went to the local rescue center. People from around the country wrote him, asking how to adopt a fox, or more often, how to find healing. Henry never gave advice, he just told them the truth. Sometimes, healing comes on 4 legs, with scars you don't understand until you feel them in yourself. Fern still lives with Henry today. She sleeps in the bed, Jasper once claimed, walks beside him through the fields, and pauses often as if listening to something far away. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's love. But every time she leans into Henry's hand or presses her forehead against his chest, it says the same thing. He didn't just save a fox, he let a dog show him how to live again.